Hello. So we're continuing our series on government and the Christian's response to government. Last time we looked at Romans 13. Today I wanted to look at First Peter chapter 2. Very similar to what Paul says to the Romans. Peter, writing to Christians that had been scattered because of the persecution under Nero, he's writing to encourage them. And one of the things that he mentions in this encouraging epistle is that they still need to obey the government. Now, the reason I point out to you that Paul was writing to Romans under the emperor and Peter is writing to Christians that are actually under persecution under the emperor Nero, the point there is that these people were told to do this by God, irrespective of how bad their governments were. The Christians that were scattered because of the persecution, it was literally illegal to be a Christian. And they were being persecuted. They were being hauled off to jail. People were being killed for being Christian. And yet, this is what Peter says even to those people. 1 Peter 2, verse 13, "Be subject for the Lord's sake to every human institution, whether it be to the emperor as supreme, or to governors as sent by him to punish those who do evil and to praise those who do good. For this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God." And so here we see this really important principle again, as we did with Paul writing to the Romans in chapter 13, that Peter is saying that God is the one that puts these people in charge of us and these institutions, whether you have a parliamentary system like in South Africa or Britain, or if you have the type of democracy that's happening in the United States, whether you have police or military police or are under martial law, as are many parts of the world. Whatever it is, we need to be subject for the Lord's sake to every institution, not because we have to be loyal to that particular party. I mean, imagine being a Christian in China under the communist regime, or in parts of the Soviet world a couple of decades ago where Christians were persecuted and were told to be loyal to the party over being loyal to Christ. Well, obviously we can't do that. So you're not being subject to the government for their sakes, but you're being subject to the government for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the emperor or the governors. So not just the one in charge, but all of the institutions that flow from that as well, that are there for our good. And the purpose of this is that the government would punish those who do evil and praise those who do good. Now, this is where things get tricky, because a lot of the protesting that happens against government decisions and the enforcement of the law is when government doesn't do what is good and when they don't punish evil. And then we have injustice, and this causes a huge outcry. And that's something that we're seeing once again now in the news, that there's an outcry because there is this injustice. For now, we do hope that the authorities will do the right thing, whatever that is. We don't have all of the information necessarily, but it certainly looks like we have enough to know that justice needs to be served. Now, the reason human beings react this way is because we have been hardwired to crave justice, and yet we sin against God all the time. And we don't really want justice for that, because justice for that is that we would be punished for our sin. And this is the good news. This is the gospel, that Jesus Christ bore that punishment on our behalf, that we can be saved from our sin. So let's never forget that we don't all want ultimate justice. And yet, it is right for us to want justice in this life, and especially that we expect the government to do this, that we expect the government to bring justice. So that's a good thing for Christians to pray for and work towards. As I said before, protesting is legal in certain countries, but there's always a legal way to do it and an illegal way to do it. And what Peter is saying here is that it's the will of God that by doing good, we should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. That Christians always are to do good and be an example of that. Next time, I'm going to answer the question, well, what is government actually supposed to do? What is the very least that Christians should expect from their government, because a lot of our problems come from putting too high an expectation on what our government is meant to do. And so we'll look at that next time. God bless.